Leah, the Vets for Peace is calling for increased civil resistance rather than just protest. There's a fine line here between civil resistance and protest. Is civil resistance getting arrested at the White House and being released? Is it thousands of people, like in Seattle, being locked down on the streets? It seems to me sometimes it's simply the morally right thing to do, and other times we should think strategically about how we look to others. It's never my intention to slow anybody down. At the moment, I don't see these conditions of civil resistance, but then again, you never do until it starts. I remember the day before the 60s, nobody said the 60s are coming. In late January 1960, nobody said 70,000 young people will be arrested in the next 3 or 4 months. And you know, the 4 that sat down at the lunch counter had no idea what they were going to set off. People had tried it before. That's why they knew the phrase sit-in. There had been freedom rides before. I was a freedom rider in 1961 in Georgia, and we'd heard of people trying in the 40s and 50s, so no one had any idea before it began. But then all of a sudden it was in the air. So far be it for me to rule it out. I certainly hope for it. In the meantime, there's always concrete work to do. There's always somebody to persuade. There's always communities to organize. There are always books to read. There are always doors to knock on. How do we reach Middle America to counteract the lies of the right-wing media? I am from Middle America. I am a lower middle class Irish Catholic boy from Royal Oak, Michigan. My priest was one of the top fascist advocates in the United States in the 1930s. So I always keep examining my life to figure out just how I made it this far and what it was that convinced me. I can think of 2 things that I might offer. One is the most important motive force in this so-called Middle America that you described, too vague a term, is a lower middle class and middle class resentment at non-recognition, at stagnant wages, at kids not being able to get into the good universities, and that leads often to scapegoating, and we know where that goes. But politics has got to be populist. The Tea Party is a populist counter-movement, but where's the populist movement? A populist movement would be railing against the Pentagon contractors in this case, or the banks, and it's there. But I'm surprised that it hasn't become more galvanized. It may be, as in the 1930s, it takes longer. You know, the Depression of 1929, which really killed my family, did not lead to the industrial labor movement, the CIO, the sit-ins in factories, for several years. People at first were shocked, or they were kind of huddling together. I remember in my grandma's house, everybody talked about doubling up, selling apples, not going to the store, growing food, whatever it did to keep the family together within a shrinking budget. And then through agitation and public awareness, there came the great movements that led to legislation that the Republicans still are fighting against. So it may simply be that we're in the gradual beginning of an upsurge. On the issue of Bradley Manning, this is a great young man, not that I know him, but he's a PFC in the military who is being held in extremely confined suffocating conditions, I suppose because some in the military or the government are trying to squeeze information out of him as if he could reveal the criminal conspiracy behind WikiLeaks downloading of several 100,000 documents. He has a defense committee. You can go to it online. They are raising money. They are trying to afford him lawyers. And there he sits, facing very hard time for a very long time. I think the demand should be that he have access to the media to tell his story, that his lawyers be able to speak, that all the classification around his case be lifted, that he have his moment in court, whether it's civilian or not, and time will tell, but I think we'll find that many people will realize that on balance, the documents released, including the documents that led to the street revolution in Tunisia, were to the public benefit, and we have to completely revise our rules of secrecy and classification. By the way, the next hearing on the extradition of Julian Assange is scheduled the second week of February in London. For those of you with contacts there, it seems to me there needs to be support to prevent his extradition, because there's nothing that some in this country want more than to see him manacled and brought to a military tribunal in the States. Kanai Powell Cleaver, would a draft wake up the younger generation? Oh yeah, that's why they won't institute it. Yes, who else? Gail Murphy, any hope the Progressive Caucus will mobilize the Dems to bring an end to the wars? Shout out to Gail and all the good people from DC and around the country in the United for Peace and Justice. Let me see that question again. There's a Progressive Caucus on Afghanistan, Iraq, immigration, healthcare. It's spread thin. I would say on a good day it can reach about 150 Democrats, which is a majority of the House, but of House Democrats, but not a majority of the new House of Representatives. They often ask us to do things like vote for them or send them money or send a petition. We should be asking them to help us. And I think somebody like Barbara Lee Wood, I think some members of Congress have staffs. They can fly around the country. They can give speeches. They can have op-ed pieces printed. They can have things in the Congressional Record. They can hold hearings that expose torture. We should ask our congressional representatives to become activists. That's real representation. In addition to the good things they do by voting against the war funding. Sandy, can we formulate one petition to circulate around the country? Go ask Gail. I do think we need a number of petition groups, and we need to communicate with each other. A lot of people are bored with petitions, but it may be we're not original enough. For example, what if 10,000 people sent a petition to NRDC and the Sierra Club asking that they pay more attention to the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, the wars for oil, and that we seek to dialogue with them about cooperative action? What if 10,000 people sent a petition to civil liberties groups who are never against the war? They're against torture, but not against the war that causes the torture, urging dialogue about how we can come together. I think there are creative ways to communicate through petitions. Reverend Ed Bacon, is data available for military enlistment by geographic area, zip code, for example? Yes, there is. I don't have it at my website. I don't have it at my fingertips. But you can find working class communities, and particularly in the south of our country is where the preponderance of the military come from. We will find a way to get that information. Surely it exists, and we'll post it at the Peace and Justice website, which you can find by going to bulletin@tomhayden.com. One last question. I don't understand the question. How do we work around the Patriot Act as activists? Our success got Exxon Valdez opposition arrested. Sorry, Brenda, I don't quite understand that, but the Patriot Act, we've got to stop branding it. We've got to change the brand. This is the new McCarthyism, and it criminalizes association which is in the public interest. And I would go to the National Lawyers Guild, the ACLU, and again, a petition to them saying, can you help us, how can we build a civic society with critical thinking if we're always having to worry about the Patriot Act criminalizing things that were not criminal just a short while ago. That's it for this week. Thank you all for participating. There'll be many more questions that we couldn't get to, but I'll make sure that I answer each and every one of them, and we'll let you know by communication when the next of these events will happen. But we're thinking of trying to do it every Monday night, and I hope that you will send us in your responses to how this went, whether it was useful, how it can become more importantly useful to the grassroots movement in this country. That's it for the School of Activism this week. I'm Tom Hayden. Thank you again, Brave New Foundation, and all who made this possible. Good night.